we spin up an incident, it'll start from a detection case or even a hunt. When we're hunting an environment, we might get some intel from our intelligence team here.
The account managers go out and, become bloodhounds, basically. They're going on the hunt, and it's like they'll chase down the salesperson, the MSP, the provider, whoever.
Did you, interact with previous detections? And if we notice inefficiencies and inability to do that effectively and quickly, then we work on our process and procedures. And we also look at automation. How do we increase the amount of information being thrown at an analyst, but make it so it's usable? Actionable intelligence is critical for these guys.
All right, so welcome back to a new episode of Cybercrime from the Frontline. And as always, this is a pod where we get the experts on board, the real people who actually do the work. And today we are talking about incidents and what happens after. I have with me Josh, Sean, and Tyler. I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves, who you are and what you do. This is Dan Borte, your host as always. Take it.
Yeah, so I'm Josh Armstrong. I'm the senior manager of Global SOC. So I oversee our security analysts around the world here, as well as another team called our content management team. Our content management team heavily focuses on our data that we're ingesting, making sure it's usable to our ops. And then, of course, our security analysts that are looking at detections and responding to incidents. So,
Sean.
Yep. I'm Sean Nickel. I'm the CTI team lead, basically supporting threat intelligence for MDR operations and for MDR and other internal customers.
Yep. Tyler Baker, the Director of Global Security Operations for the MDR service. Been doing this with Bitdefender for the last 6.5 years, and then also served for the last 21 years in the Air Force as an intelligence analyst and supporting both cyber and traditional intelligence operations globally. So happy to be here.
Also 20 years in the military for me, since Tyler's going to hit that. So.
It's good to have you guys. Thank you. That's awesome. For those for those of you who've been following, I like to have these gentlemen back. Our topic today is incidents and what happens after. But before we talk about the incidents themselves, I'd like us to discuss a little bit about the setup, because we're onboarding organizations, and that process I think is really interesting, and I think is revealing on how the incidents when they occur will play out. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think it all starts for me is second we bring on customers to the MDR service, and I believe that all MDR services should kind of operate in this way. Is MDR is a partnership between the security analysts, the teams that support them, the intelligence operations that support them, and the customer themselves. And so, from the day that we onboard a new customer into our service, we're looking at establishing that relationship with them, because, when we're dealing with incidents, we're dealing with attacks, they need to understand what's going on, and they need to be able to respond appropriately in the way that we need them to, but also, understand why we're reaching out to them, and so they can inform their leadership about what's going on. And so, we heavily stress how important that relationship is with our customers. And, and that starts with not only giving them an understanding of how we're going to onboard them, how the technology is going to work, how our service is going to operate, and what they can expect, and set those expectations early, but also describing what the incident response process looks like for them. And so they know that when they're getting a call at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and we're waking them up, they're not surprised, and they understand that, okay, I need to respond, I need to answer this call, and I need to take the right steps and follow the guidance that's being in place or that's being provided to them. And so, a little bit more about our incident response process is, we heavily focus on being as proactive as possible. That our piece of MDR is response, and we want to make sure that our customers know that we're going to take them immediate action to stop the threats. And and that all starts with our investigation, using the technology that we have in place to be able to detect those threats, whether that's a phishing attack, whether that's an interactive attacker in your environment. All of those can lead to ransomware or data exfil or further exploits into your environment that can cause serious business impact. And so being able to detect those threats and respond appropriately is critical. And then, a lot of it that ties into our process and procedures. How do we investigate? How do we analyze the detections? How do we contextualize intelligence and the other events to make sure that we understand what the threat is doing, and how do we then eradicate them from the environment? And then that's a response piece that kind of I alluded to earlier is, we need to be able to take pre-approved actions. We need to be able to block an IP. We need to stop a process. We need to isolate a host. Whatever we need to do and we feel is the appropriate action, we will do that. And so the customer knows that, hey, I don't really need to do anything other than listen, but I know I have a team that they can interact with, that I can ask questions to, and then I can know that they're being as forward-leaning as possible with the threats. And then lastly is that transparency piece of it. When we're dealing with an incident, customers want to know what's going on. They want to feel like they're a part of it, that they understand what's going on, and then also interacting with us. And so providing the details and the after action report to them allows them to see the threat, see how we detected it, how we eradicated it, and then also how we responded appropriately. And then they can share that with their leadership. And so, that's really what we aim to achieve. It's a highly developed process to make sure that our customers get the best possible outcome, but also, I like mentioned, kind of transparent. So they see the results. They know what we're going to do with them. And then, if they have more questions, if they want to interact with us, get more detail after it's all over, 100%. We'll jump on calls. We'll get have meetings with them, respond to emails to make sure that they understand and have a complete understanding of that threat, because this can be the worst day for them, and we understand
Exactly.
that. So,
and it's we keep saying this because we know that's true, and it's not for fear mongering, but it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So then preparedness makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious about one thing. So when you talk to onboard a new client, a new customer, of course it makes sense that a lot of the technology permits a blanket role, but there's a lot of customization as well, or should I say understanding of their needs and particularities that prepare you for the events. And how do we carry those out, and what makes it, because what makes the process special, and how do we achieve that relationship that's I don't want to make it sound custom because it's not something that's particularly bespoke, but it's impossible not to, right? So
yeah, every customer is unique. And so, first we have kind of two sides to this that we combat it with, and I'll let these two guys add on to it. But, it starts with that baselining the environment. So looking at the detections that are coming in and the risks and the anomalies of that environment, and then determining the best course of action from that. And, Josh can add some more context to that, but also from the Sean side, the intelligence, the threat modeling piece. And, how do we use intelligence to look externally and understand the attack surface of our customers? And that allows us to really effectively monitor and then be able to respond appropriately. But, Josh, let's talk about the baseline part of it.
Yeah.
How that.
So, initially when we bring on a customer, it's important to understand that their policies are configured correctly, right? Our policies, what we set out on the agent and what it's capable of doing, need to be configured correctly. And we have recommendations for our customers. When they don't follow those things, sometimes it can lead to an incident happening quicker, and also, worse things happening, if you will, because of those recommendations not being followed. But once we bring a customer on, we typically give it about 30 days or so of ingesting data, of looking at detections. And as we're going through that, we're excluding items as we learn that they have maybe custom scripts that are running in the environment that might trigger false positives. We're trying to tune those things out and get really towards that 100% true positive. We want to see things coming in that we're actioning on, that we're taking. We don't like to, work the same detections over and over. We want it to be something quality. And so we're continuing tuning their environment. We're updating their customer knowledge base so that we can really understand their whole environment the best we can, so that we can respond, accordingly. And I know Sean has the threat intelligence side that brings a piece into that, and he can explain more on that.
Yeah, so we basically, for MDR Plus customers, in addition to kind of a basic knowledge base, we have a threat model that we build out. And so, from day one, they fill out a questionnaire that's pretty comprehensive, but it covers a lot of important information. So we get that baseline almost from day one. And so we understand, the environment we're securing, where things are located, all that different stuff, because we found that in an incident, in addition to just kind of monitoring for day-to-day risk, in an incident that can be crucial, because if I can understand maybe like the naming schema for a laptop, and I see something that doesn't fit that schema, then that's probably already a suspicious activity. Or If I have an understanding about their like technological stack, then I have an idea as far as for, if there's a specific vulnerability being exploited or there's something that's going on that could point to whatever applications are in their environment, we already have kind of a head start on the investigation. So between that, we issue advisories to help out customers with best practices when we find out there's something under exploit. All those things we're trying to do, like Tyler said, to stay proactive and kind of leaning forward into the threat, making sure we're ahead. And there's been a lot of times where our timing has been pretty impeccable.
Yeah.
But having all that additional context helps with those investigations, either to keep them out, or if they do get an investigation, we have some places to start looking.
Right.
Yeah, and threat intelligence, Sean's team definitely helps us during incidents as we're working through them to give us, additional context into different items. Sometimes we see new IOCs that we're not completely aware of. And, Sean's team has a little bit more data, if you will, that they can provide us that will help guide our team sometimes during incidents and where to take it. So.
Now, the incident just happened. Now what? Both inside and out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so our incidents process really, when we spin up an incident, it'll start from a detection case or even a hunt. When we're hunting an environment, we might get some intel from our intelligence team here that will lead to something bigger that might have went undetected by the agent itself. And so that might lead into an incident. A lot of our incidents, though, will come from a detection. We'll get a detection that comes in, we start looking into it and realizing it's something bigger. And so at that point, we will spin up an incident. We have different severities. So typically an interactive attacker, there's an attacker in the environment doing things, that's going to be a critical. And then we have high severities. Those are things like maybe somebody downloading some malware on a box. It partially gets blocked, but not fully, and it's still kind of doing things. That's going to be more along the lines of a high severity. But once we spin up our incident, we'll reach out to our customers very quickly, let them know that we're starting an incident. We'll provide them an initial report. We call it a flash report, and it just lets them know the initial infection vector, why we spun this into an incident, why we're heading down that path. And during incidents, it's super important. There's a lot of things, that customers need to be aware of. One of those is communicating off the bat to us. When we call a customer, it's very important for them to understand what's happening. Sometimes we need them to take an action for us. Maybe that's reset a user cred, in which we, may not have the ability to do for them. And it's still important for them to respond to us during those times. Something else, while we're working an incident, we have hosts that are online, and what we can do is initiate an isolation task to where that host can only communicate back to us. Doesn't have external or internal traffic coming in and out. And a lot of times customers will, kind of freak out a little bit when they hear incident and start pulling the plugs, right? That's a tendency that people have to do when they say, hey, well, I'm under attack. I need to just pull the plug, disconnect everything, right? And for us, it's important for that not to happen. We want the device online, but we want it only communicating to us so we can perform that analysis on it. And so it's super important, as leaving those things on, taking our recommendations during incidents are so important as well.
I mean, usually this is discussed before, so you would assume that it just gets followed, but I'm not going to be naive to believe that during the panic attack of the situation, your one customer or another might actually end up doing the wrong thing like that, right? So
yeah, I mean, it can vary, and you have a lot of different people working for different companies, and maybe not all of them understand how the incident process works and really what their expectation is out of an incident. We're obviously trying to remediate, respond, take action on behalf of the customer, but there are times where we do need that interaction from the customer, and saying things like, we'll get to it tomorrow, can really affect the customer sometimes, right? Attackers don't wait. They don't care if you're on vacation.
yeah, give us a couple of days.
Yeah, they don't care that you're taking a nap. All right, they're gonna attack
Take the dog
environment.
out.
That's right.
Sorry,
That's right. And you'd be surprised how many times we get responses of those things. I've had a customer respond before that they're taking a nap, they're asleep, and we'll get back to you in a little bit.
Okay.
And so 100% customers definitely need to understand, some of the expectations that we have out of them in that. So,
And there's even like the small percentage that don't have any contact information, so they got onboarded, they got sold a thing, and their emergency contact no longer works there, or it's not a working number. And we've had the account managers go out and become bloodhounds basically. They're going on the hunt, and it's like they'll chase down the salesperson, the MSP, the provider, whoever, go on LinkedIn, find them on social media and like reach out to the people, and it's amazing how fast that chain works. And somebody finally calls back, but there's been a few times where things kick off and they neglected to update that contact information. So starting on step one, they've already failed, so
I would have never guessed that was a thing. That's insane. That's an insane data point right there.
Yeah.
The fact that you have to chase them down and be a stalker to solve their problem.
Oh yeah.
Going on LinkedIn and be like, okay.
Yeah.
And then of course the person you might reach on LinkedIn is not authorized to receive that information. So you have to navigate around that. Well, I'd love to tell you, but then get me in touch with this, that.
Yep.
That's crazy. So when do you and your team get involved at this point?
Generally it's, as soon as it kicks off, a lot of times we're looking at some of the initial information that's coming in. So, we're looking at things like, system information, maybe the kinds of applications that are being used. Attack vectors kind of help, because if it's something beyond phishing, like maybe, was customer using VPN? Was it a vulnerable VPN? All those different things, we start running down those possibilities on our side. And then we'll start looking for things that are kind of maybe matching that activity to maybe help them with additional ways to pivot through the investigation, or best case scenario, they can rule that out. Oh, it's probably not this thing. Let's check out a new line of investigation. So a lot of times just being that extra set of eyes, or like a sanity check, is what we want to do for the SOC at that point. We don't want to bog them down, but we're kind of like watching, kind of in an Overwatch position, like if you need the help, we're there, so we'll follow along with them in the initial stages.
Yeah, I mean, and it's by design. We need to enable the experts to stay and work the incidents and stay in their lane. That way that they are absolutely focused and can respond appropriately. And so, Josh's, Security Operations Center is the analysts are there to do the investigation. They're there to respond. They're there to look at the environment, the anomalies, the risks, and make sure that the threat is completely eradicated. But they're not focused on attribution. They're not looking at, the TTPs from an attack surface to try to understand why this threat may have tried to get through this vulnerability and what they were aiming to achieve. That's where Sean's team comes in. And having a dedicated intelligence team to look at those attack profiles and to develop them and provide pivot points essentially for our analysts so they can hunt, so they can look for additional TTPs that are going on, allows our analysts to kind of really heavily focus on the investigation piece and not have to worry about everything else. And so these two teams, which are a global operation, support each other and work very closely with each other to make sure that customers are getting the best possible outcome during this investigation. Because, as we mentioned, it's already, sometimes it's difficult to get a hold of them. So, like if we're dealing with that plus inefficiencies in our own team, it's just going to be a really bad experience. So we heavily focus on our teams, our collaboration, and then our process and procedures to make sure that we're as effective as possible when we're dealing with these incidents day in, day out.
Sounds like it sounds like the processes can't stay up in the same form for too long. It sounds like it's a living organism too, right?
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, like they need to continuously evolve. They need to, adjust to the complexity of new technologies, new vulnerabilities, new attack vectors that are coming into there. And then, investigations need to grow. Analysts need to think beyond, the basic level of, I took this action, I didn't see any additional activity, but did you walk through all of the steps? Did you actually go through, the extra alert data? Did you use the SIM technology in the best possible way? Did you, interact with previous detections? And if we notice inefficiencies and inability to do that effectively and quickly, then we work on our process and procedures. And we also look at automation. How do we increase the amount of information being thrown at an analyst, but make it so it's usable? Actionable intelligence is critical for these guys. And so all of that is like you mentioned, a living organism to be continuously updated and evaluated to make sure that we're growing and we're able to meet the needs of our customers. And it's not just the process procedures, it's technology too.
Yeah.
And we work very closely with, a lot of our internal support teams to make sure that our technology is growing to meet the needs of us and our customers, because ultimately we're the voice for them too. We're the ones sitting on top of it. They purchased it, but we're sitting on top of it, using it day in, day out. And so
And you got to be the calm, cool, collected voice throughout the whole process, right? And
Yeah.
are you seeing the same from the organizations that we work with?
I wouldn't say they're always calm, you know.
I mean, it makes sense, right? So
100%, and that goes kind of back to customers understanding their expectations
right.
during incidents. You know, there's a lot of intricacies, even down to, you know, we talked about them pulling plugs, right? Sometimes customers want to just re-image a host real quick, or they want to delete some sort of artifact, and it's important to gather those logs and gather that data before you get rid of it, which is going to assist us in understanding, you know, more about the attack and honestly how to prevent it in the future.
But it sounds like, I mean, without saying, not necessarily in historically in our organization, but maybe in others. I mean, all these fears that the customer might do the wrong thing in the process, and we're not attributing blame. It's not. It's just, you know, it's a very fast moving situation. Things might just break, and you might make it worse. So it sounds like it happened a lot that we're so scared of it. So and it sounds like we've gone through it as well. So is there any key takeaways, or how do we introduce that back into the process, so we make sure that of course communication, but what other ways are there to improve on the process?
I know for us, a lot of times with the threat model, it helps when customers kind of like regularly review the questionnaires and, you know, update stuff, because they're, you know, you might have been an Oracle user last year, but this year you bought some new GWiz, you know, database technology, and Oracle's gone. And so, you know, if you start kind of removing those chess pieces from the table, that helps us with the investigations and kind of understanding the environment. Maybe, you know, keeps us from getting spun up about something thinking it's the worst case, and it's like, nope, we got rid of that firewall, we got this new one that's, you know, 100%, you know, patch. So all those kind of different things, you know, we always recommend that help, because that helps us ultimately with the investigations for sure.
And, you know, as we're working detections as part of that, understanding the environment, but even past that, you know, after the 30 days, after the 60 days, after the 90 days, right? As we continue to build and grow and understand the environment, we send out customer verification requests, we send out recommendations, and having customers respond to those and stay on top of them is super important, because that can help us really lock down the environment more and obviously understand it in that way. So having that responsiveness is super important. That can kind of help us, you know, hopefully avoid incidents, because that's obviously what we want to do.
Yeah, I think what these guys are alluding to essentially is, how do we guide our customers along this journey?
Right.
How do we show them kind of the path forward to be able to not only interact with us in the right way, but how do we start to prevent this activity? How do we get ahead of it? And so, you know, with our intelligence teams, we actively look for the against the threat landscape and try to produce intelligence products that can be, you know, sent to the customers, and they can use that for education piece. You know, this is a new threat in your environment, this, or a new threat, a vulnerability that is out there. What can you do to prevent this from being exploited in your in the environment that we're monitoring? But then also, you know, hey, we obviously can look at vulnerabilities. We see, you know, new risks in your environment. How does Josh analysts go and look at those and go, all right, let me tell them about different best practices and policies that they should put in place to help reduce the attack surface, to reduce the availability of these threats being used against them. And I think that's something that we really take a lot of pride in, is, you know, this is bigger than, you know, just dealing with detections. This is bigger than honestly just dealing with incidents. It's a relationship that has to continue outside of those events happening, and we look for opportunities to help be proactive in those customers' environments to make sure that they're aware of the threats, and then they're aware of the vulnerabilities that might be exploited against them. And, you know, with great technology, you know, you're able to kind of get on top of those quickly and easier, and you have the context that they need to patch quickly if they really need
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then how often would somebody hear from you guys? I mean, because my assumption is, right, I'm just gonna play ignorance here, and I'll be like, if I don't hear from you guys, everything's peachy. All right. That's how I want it to be, but that's not, I'm sure that doesn't work that way, and it can't work that way, especially since you do need to keep the updates going and keep it proactive. So I'm trying to get a sense of, you know, how often should somebody hear from you guys?
I think it all depends. So you obviously have your product updates, right? And those need to stay updated, but you also have your environment recommendations and things that we see. It kind of depends on the size of the environment, how active the customer is, what they're doing, as to how often they're going to hear from us. I mean, I could, potentially you could hear from me daily, depending on what you're doing, or it might go a couple weeks before you hear from us. But we do, obviously send out reports periodically to the customers, providing those updates of, things that we're doing within the environment at minimum. It kind of varies, we've had some customers that have 10 hosts, right? And they're pretty quiet for the most part. And like I said, you might not hear from us super often, but you're going to see, in your portal, you're going to see your detections that we're working. You're going to see recommendations that we see, any kind of intel threat hunts that we do to understand, do you have vulnerabilities in your environment, things like that. The less you hear from us, probably better. But again, it all varies how often you're going to hear from us.
Yeah, a lot of times we're also kind of keeping an eye on the threats out there. And so a lot of times we might be doing some research for, customer A has a question about a thing. And so we start doing research and we start to find out, oh, this could actually apply to a subset of our customers. So, we'll repurpose that research and turn it into what we call a tipper, and that'll get sent out to customers. Maybe it's a threat because of, increasing crime in Asia, or it might be a brand new ransomware variant that's, affecting certain industries or certain areas more often. And so a lot of times whenever we can repurpose and reuse that, we'll send those reports out to the customers as well, and it could be one of those things that they never hear from us, but that report hit them and it resounded with them, and, we'll get some feedback that it was great or appreciated. And, and there's going to always be that percentage of customers that, things will go into the ether and you'll probably never hear from them until renewal time. That's always going to happen. But that feedback piece is great when we do get it, because it's nice to know, like, either this was good stuff, or, not valid, do better next time. We'll take the feedback either way, but it's nice when you can close that loop, for sure.
For sure. And then you finish the investigation, the incident is closed. What happens next?
Yeah, so once we finish it, we feel like we've remediated, we feel like everything's locked down. One thing we do is we go into a period of post-monitoring. So before we actually provide an after-action report, which is the final piece, but before that, we like to take a period of time and really focus on how the attacker got in the environment, making sure that there's no persistence, right? Once all that's concluded, we'll have a after-action report that gets sent to the customer. Within that report, you have different sections. So you'll have a summary of really what happened, a high-level overview. You'll have a detailed section within there so you can see everything that the attacker did, files they touched, commands they ran. You also get to see what we did, the actions we did. Maybe we had to reset a cred. We might have had to isolate a host, delete a file, things like that. Customer's going to get to see all that. They'll also get recommendations. So any post recommendations, things like we might see a laptop that has all its ports open to the internet, right? Lock those down. Things like that we're going to recommend to the customer to help them really hard code their environment. And then you'll get to see the actions that we took throughout the incident. We'll have those broken down, as well as a timeline. And the timeline is going to really point out everything the attacker touched, like, maybe registry keys they modified, different commands they ran, and it's timelined out for them. And that after action report will go out to the customer, and they'll review it. A lot of times we get great feedback from those after action reports. If there's further questions that they have, we'll jump on a call and answer any of those things that they have.
A lot of times we'll jump in also if there was certain parts of the investigation that happened that maybe kind of helps add more context, like to the how or the why about the incident itself. Like, or we'll run across maybe something that kind of a best practice. Like, for instance, during the incident we went through, because we think it was a phishing attack, or it might have been like maybe a brute force attack where they had credentials, or we're trying to get credentials. And then, we'll do an investigation and find out that there's, 700 emails and passwords that have been exposed on this customer. To me, that turns into like a best practice recommendation. So that's our chance to say, hey, you have all these unsecured credentials that are exposed. You may want to look at resetting, maybe auditing, or this is a typical attack method from these types of, groups. So it helps maybe kind of give them something to think about, after incident. Maybe it changes, processes on their side too. So we're just giving those kind of recommendations.
And this is why, like, our incident response process is so important. I think customers and smaller cybersecurity teams won't have that level of maturity in them, and they're going to be looking to quickly understand how did they get in, and oh my gosh, like what do we need to do, how do we need to patch, and like, oh god, do we need to build a timeline, oh I got to answer my CEO's questions, I got to enter my CIO's questions. And we heavily focus on the methodical steps that we go through to really make sure that the threat's eradicated. And then, as Josh mentioned, that post kind of 72-hour monitoring period allows us to really go back through and build out that timeline, understand, did we have any gaps in our investigation? Is there some other places that we need to pivot to? Do we need to collect additional logs or information to understand the root cause? And then also, build up that story for our customers so they can see the end state of what actually happened. And, this detailed steps that we take during our incident process ensures that those things happen in order. And so sometimes customers want to, like, can you give us the after action report like right now? We're like, no, we're still in the investigation phase. Like, we still need to contain and get the threat out of your environment. And once we figure that out, then 100% we'll be as transparent. You'll have all the details you need. But that process and our experience with that really helps guide customers through this experience, gets them to understand it, gets them to walk with us during this incident and this high stressful time. And then at the end of it, they'll go, cool, thank you, we got it. We appreciate the after action report. This makes sense. All right, any other recommendations that y'all have? Also in the AR, but maybe here's some additional ones. And it really just stress that partnership piece. They start to go and they feel that relationship. And we talked about earlier, is like, we deal with customers that sometimes don't interact with us, and we never want them to have an incident, but sometimes that's a wake-up call that needs to happen to get them to understand the importance of the service, that attacks are going to happen. They're going to happen at any time. So be prepared. We're here watching, we're here monitoring, but in the event that we need to get a hold of you, we need to get a hold of you. And then that second time or that third time, they're like, hey, yep, what do you need? All right, gotcha. We're here to support. I got this person on standby for any calls. And it just makes that whole experience a lot better. And so, like I said, we aim to achieve no incidents. It's not what we want. We're aimed to get an attacker out of your environment as far left in the attacker lifecycle as possible, but they do happen. And so our incident response process is very detailed and very methodical to make sure that our customers see the value in what we're doing day in, day out.
What was the last time that an incident happened and you guys freaked out? Just a little bit, because you don't. It's impossible. But if you did, like, how was that like? How did that change you or better you?
I think a lot of the times with those type of things is, we have it's that telemetry wasn't available. That's usually when we start to go, oh man, what happened? How did they get in and we didn't notice it? And so that could be a 0 day. Like we recently dealt with one of those where they definitely exploited a web application and was able to really get into the environment, go undetected, and get sensitive information. Now, that's unfortunate. That's not what we want out of this, but our ability and knowledge and the expertise that we have allows us to walk through that steps and go, all right, what do we know about this threat? Where, what host was identified? How do we interact with it? How do we start to gather the information? We don't have it. All right, what information can we ask the customer? What logs can they gather on behalf of us on the certain application that might be in the cloud or maybe the firewall that we can use in our investigation? And then we start to walk through with them of like, all right, this is what it's pointing to. This is the next log that we need. And we really try to make sure that we're not, leaving it up like, nope, sorry, we didn't see it, so your problem now, but help them and guide them through this and make sure that they're getting the best possible outcome. We also see, and this is kind of the big stress point that Josh and I always have, unmanaged devices. For whatever reason, they determined that this device either couldn't have an agent on it, couldn't have EDR, XDR, or maybe through pricing or criticality wasn't added into the environment. And that allows attackers as well. That allows them to elevate privileges, to get to domain level credentials, and then pivot into the environment and launch attacks quickly.
Yeah.
And so unmanaged devices are another bane. So like where we freak out is in, the unknown and the lack of data, the lack of telemetry.
Right.
And a lot of it can be solved with, explaining to customers that every part of your environment is critical. And then also, using different technologies like third-party log collection, data lake sim to be able to have access to some of those raw events to be able to add more context in the events needed. But
yeah, and we say freak out in that essence, but I'd also add on there, it's a great learning experience
Right.
as well. we can learn a lot through some of the things that we haven't seen before, right? And those can actually affect other customers. Obviously, we have a lot of different industry verticals out there, and something that might happen to one customer might help a majority of the other customers. So,
Is it possible that it might happen concurrently too?
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
I've seen it.
And we've
Yep.
seen that. And we've seen it like within like minutes of each other.
Yeah.
This attack, this vulnerability, this, we're like, what are you working on? Yep, I'm working on the same thing. But we're like, all right, same customer? They're like, nope,
No.
different customer. We're like, all right, this is pointing to a vulnerability out there. How do we respond? And,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's where Josh's, you know, team excels. It's like, how do we interact? How do we use Intel team to kind of support those things? So,
Yeah.
I was wondering, I mean, even like the human side of it, right? Of course, it's a 24/7 operation, right? Do you, how many weekends are impacted for some of you, even if you're not on call? Or let me put it this way: attackers choose the weirdest times to do their gig. So, what's their favorite time and date that you?
A lot of times, I'd like to point to either like nights or holidays. You know,
Have a
we've seen
favorite holiday?
all of them.
Just so they don't.
You know, like for instance, for schools, we'll see things like where they go on summer break or things like that. You know, we've had a customer before, it was like a Friday afternoon and everybody was headed out to summer break and they got attacked right then and there, you know. So honestly, it's whenever, but generally I think attackers think, you know, at nights or on holidays when not as many people are going to be around, would be the best, where there's not as many eyes within the environment and maybe not as many people to respond.
That's great. A final kind of last question before I let you guys go. I'm curious how your day-to-day operation looks like when you're not just monitoring and looking at the screens to see what's up and trying to get like how do you, is that time mostly spent up just, you know, keeping up to date with the latest, looking elsewhere for you know, the whatever new CVs that might show up and trying to understand an environment? How do you make it interesting?
Yeah, from my side, you know, obviously we're working detections nonstop and we're working incidents and hunts. But outside of that, you know, we're always trying to make improvements. I mean, I have a meeting every week, if not twice a week, about process and procedures, just reviewing those. And sometimes, even if we don't have updates to them, we're reviewing them to understand and make sure that they're proper. The other thing is training and on the job training, external training. You know, continuing to keeping our knowledge up to par with the latest and greatest, and so that we can, you know, really understand kind of how attackers are shifting and moving and to keep up on top of it. So that's kind of, you know, from our security analyst side of things. We also have our content management team, and you know, we're constantly looking at the data. How can we make it more accurate, more usable? How can we adjust signatures to catch things? You know, providing feedback to our product team, so that, you know, the product obviously is the fastest on the life cycle. It's going to catch things the quickest. But you know, you obviously have your other side of it, and building playbooks around things. You know, when you get these new attacks, these 0 days that they're talking about, you know, how do we incorporate those into another playbook so that we catch it in the future, right? So there's always kind of that constant review of things going on, training, you know. So that's really kind of how our analysts are working on a day-to-day.
Yeah, we're usually kind of focused on different, you know, news feeds, and coming from a lot of different spots. It could be darknet stuff, could be, you know, as easy as looking on like Blue Sky or X, you know, Telegram and things like that. You know, just keeping an eye out for like specific kinds of chatter. You know, it's like we reached, you know, Oracle. This last one, you know, was a kind of a big deal, and it hit a fever pitch like very quickly. And so, you know, that makes us hit the decision point of like, do we send a tipper out to customers? Do we start getting hunts ready for, you know, for the SOC? You know, things like that to see how we're going to respond. And so keeping an eye on different stuff, and you know, having those different knowledge bases that we do about our customers helps out, because, you know, I can go in, and if I can identify a subset of customers that could be affected by whatever the new threat is, we can start, you know, we can spin up research like that. We can have a report out in a couple hours, you know, or less. You know, so trying to get as far left of that attack as we can. So hopefully have customers shore up defenses. So just keeping an eye on what's out there. That's our big thing.
Yeah. Our operation is growing and changing continuously. And so, from our side, from my side, I have to look at the operational excellence of our organization. Are we able to meet the demands of scaling and growing and doing the incident response and doing the hunting to achieve the effects that we need to achieve in our customers' environments? But another side of it is we are a human-led organization. I have to take in the analysts' quality of life and make sure that they're being supported with training and capabilities and technology, but also supported emotionally and what they do day out. That they see the results of the hard work that they put in, that they're not getting burnt out, because that's a very big deal in a SOC world in this lifestyle. It's one of the biggest reasons that you see people move out of this is because these are long hours, these are long shifts, and you're dealing with a lot of detections and a lot of incidents, and it's hard. So, from my level, always focusing on how do we improve that, how do we add automation, how do we add capability, how do we lessen the skills gap between analysts so they don't feel so stressed, and then growing so they become better and they're more useful to us as a person in the SOC, and then making sure that we're not overwhelming them. How do we add more people? How do we grow the operation to meet the demands of our customers? And so, with what Josh and Sean do daily, they're heavily focused and making sure that our analysts know that we're watching, we're looking at what they're doing day in, day out, but also providing feedback to leadership on these are the issues. This is what we need to fix. This is how we need to grow, and then providing great solutions on how we do achieve those things. And so, like you mentioned earlier, we're a living organism. We're a human-led operation, and so making sure that we're operationally excellent and have all the necessary morale in place to make sure our teams are doing great is critical for us.
And it's not watching over in a creepy way either. It's more like, how can I help you, do the job, and whether it's that, time off or like, getting people promoted, or, do I need to shift resources to help you do your job better? Do we need to get this new automation in place and all those different things to, make their lives easier? Because I have the same problem with my analysts. It's like, I want them to have the least amount of clicks to do the most work and the best job that they can. And so, all those other things, I want to remove the friction and, make sure that everyone's, happy and wanting to do the work. So,
I mean, knowing you guys, knowing the work that you do, learning some more through our conversation now, I definitely wouldn't want to go against you and your managed services. So, I really want to thank you for opening eyes on parts of the operation that are not visible from the outside. So, I would yap forever and I would ask you more things. For me, it's a learning opportunity that I'm sure is shared. So with that, I really want to thank you for joining me once more, and good luck on the endeavors, and hope to get you on a new episode soon. Perfect. So with that, thank you very much. I'll see you on the next one.